Did any of the following actually happen as described in these scary stories? Dogman. In the treetops. Dear Scary Stories NYC. My wife doesn't believe me, but we have a dogman that is hunting in the trees behind our house. She refuses to look when I point it out to her. By she, I mean my wife, not the dogman, who may or may not be male or female. I can see that it is canine, and I can see it climbing through the branches. Wolves and other kinds of dogs do not climb in trees. That is something that usually only felines do, not canines. This is not any kind of feline, and I don't know of any normal dog that looks like what I've been seeing. First of all, I want it clear that this is not a natural animal. It's more like having a sighting of a science fiction character from a movie. Second of all, I want to contradict myself and make certain you understand that this was most definitely a physical creature. When it climbs out on the thinner branches, they sway under its weight. I'm certain that if it stepped on soft ground, it would leave footprints and proof that it had passed in that direction, even though you should not start thinking that this creature was real in the sense that you and I are. One time, when my wife was on the verge of considering that I might be seeing something real, she suggested to me that it actually was a dog or wolf that I was seeing, just a strange one that for some reason enjoyed climbing in trees. Just because it was incredibly unlikely, she suggested to me, that didn't mean it was impossible. I remember shaking my head and explaining it held onto the branches in the way that a cat would, by sinking its long, sharp claws deep into the bark and the wood. So then it's a cat, shouted my increasingly frustrated wife. It couldn't be, I explained as calmly as I could. The way the creature moved was too much the way a human moves. It looked like a hairy man or woman with long, sharp claws and some kind of werewolf-like head. Honestly, that would be a better description than to call it a dog head. This really looked like a werewolf lurking in the treetop branches. The first night I noticed it, one of the neighbor's cats was out wandering around on our lawn chasing something. I couldn't see what she was after, but it might have been a mouse, I thought at the time. I remember standing by a window looking out at this scene one night after midnight. Then I heard my neighbor calling for her cat in her "I'm being quiet because it's late" way of shouting that is actually just as loud as her normal shout. The cat jumped and ran home, and I saw something turn in the tree branches above as the cat passed beneath it. Focusing my eyes ahead of me from that second-story window, I was able to see the werewolf or dogman for the first time. I almost leaped backward. It was that outlandishly frightening and unexpected a thing to see there. I mean, it was crawling along this big branch, watching the cat go home. And when it had gone, the hairy thing did this sort of fall out of the tree, landing silently on the grass on its hind legs. Then it took a few delicately placed bipedal steps forward, and the dog-headed humanoid fell to all fours and closed its massive teeth around whatever it was that the neighbor's cat had been chasing. The immense but graceful beast sort of galloped off into the shadows to my right, still not making any sound whatsoever. I ran to that side of my house, to the window pointing closest to the direction that the manimal ran off into. I threw it open and stuck my head out into the night. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but my nose was met with a most foul odor. This caused me to jerk my head back quickly in revulsion, and I might have gotten a little banged up on that window as I withdrew into my house. I closed the window as quickly as I could, but there's still some of that smell in that room to this day. I've seen the creature out the window on other nights too, usually after midnight. I'm not sure what game it finds at that hour, but that seems to be when its workday happens. None of the sightings have been as eventful as that first one. I haven't seen him drop to the ground again, although I keep my cell phone charged at night and in my pocket in case he ever pulls that trick again. Right now, I'd mainly like for my wife to look when I ask her to look. It really would be a huge boon to me if there were a second person who could confirm what I was seeing. She outright admitted to me that she's too afraid to see what I'm seeing, so she knows there must be something there. And yet, she undermines me and tells me I'm crazy. She insults me to our mutual friends and says I'm out of my head. If she's so sure about that, why won't she at least look where I'm pointing? If it's really not there, then I'll agree to go see a shrink. That's not good enough for her, though. I think she's afraid that she'll need the shrink herself after she's forced to admit that I've been seeing something very real, but very inexplicable. Oh, by the way, the werewolf creature is not the only strange thing in those woods. We also have these weird lights that move around out there. Sometimes it looks like a few people carrying flashlights and walking in your direction, but other times they take on different colors and float up into the same branches that I see the Dogman in. Although I've never seen the two in one place at the same time, and I don't know if they're related. An interesting side fact about the lights is that my wife actually saw them before I did. We were having a picnic, just the two of us, in our backyard, and it started to get later in the day. The sun was going down, and my wife noticed lights moving around in the woods. We both stared into the darkness, trying to understand what we were seeing. After some time, she shrugged her shoulders and asked me to help her clean up before it got pitch dark out. To her, it was just something she couldn't explain. But to me, it was a deep mystery. I kept my eye out for similar occurrences, but when I pointed them out to my better half, she always refuses to look where I'm pointing. She says she doesn't doubt me that I'm seeing lights, because she knows there are lights in those woods sometimes. She just figures it's an optical illusion or something, and it's not interesting enough for her to put her screen down for a second to look. Sometimes I wonder if there might be some kind of connection between the lights and the Dogman, but my friends say I'm jumping the shark on that assumption. Yes, my friends do still say jumping the shark, okay? I'm thinking about getting game cameras to try and get photos of the Dogman, but I would also need to hire somebody to climb up in the trees to set it up for me. The chances of ever catching anything but a squirrel or a bird up there seem so small, the entire thing would probably be pointless. And yet, it feels like I should be doing something. They say these things come and go, and you better get your evidence while the events are taking place. Sometimes a cryptid or odd manifestation can appear regularly for years, and then disappear suddenly and permanently. But I don't know exactly what I should be doing about the Dogman in the treetops. I remote viewed a Dogman, and it remote viewed me back. Dear Scary Stories NYC. A while back I got involved in remote viewing as a hobby, albeit a very serious hobby. I don't do it anymore, and I wouldn't advise anyone else to try it either. If you're going to do it for a living and accept the dangers that come with it, that's your choice. But to do it out of curiosity, I think is a very bad idea. I've heard some freaky stories from others about scary things that happened to them while remote viewing, but the scariest thing that ever happened to me, and the reason I quit doing all of this in the end, was that I remote viewed a dog-headed human being, and that creature turned and looked me straight in the eye. I had never been looked at before while remote viewing. My basic assumption was that nobody could possibly see me while I was doing it. I thought I was just using my imagination and the extended nature of consciousness to get an idea of what other places and times looked and felt like. After I realized the Dogman could see me there in his reality, I knew that this had to be more than imagination somehow. Either I was actually traveling in space and time in a real sense, or else the universe is really imagination-based. In the latter case, there would be no difference at all between physically traveling to a space or time and pretending to travel there. If that twisted your brain around a little bit, think about how I feel. This is all just too overwhelming for me, and I spent most of my waking life since then trying to pretend that none of this happened to me. I don't want to even know if I actually traveled in time in some sense, or if we all have the ability to create or change reality by imagining that we are doing so. All I want out of life is to eat a microwave Trader Joe's dinner, enjoy something good on YouTube or streaming, hang out with my girlfriend, and then go to sleep. I don't really want to pretend I'm traveling in time, then accidentally make enemies who actually travel through time to take revenge on me or my girlfriend. She and I have jobs. We have friends. We need to keep our feet in this world, on planet normal. I don't want to wake up and find myself Doctor Strange or Spider-Man. It wouldn't be fair to Mary Jane after all. Figuratively speaking, my girlfriend isn't really named Mary Jane. When I first got involved with remote viewing, it was a weekend project organized by a friend of mine. Let's call him Mr. A for the sake of this. He would get some sort of interesting and out-of-the-ordinary yet still everyday object, and he would hide it in some place in public. It was sort of like geocaching, if you know about that, but instead of leaving clues to guide you to the location of the buried treasure, you would figure it out using your psychic powers, or however remote viewing works, I don't really know. When doing remote viewing, some people jot words down that pop into their heads. Others draw pictures of images they see mentally. Still others will verbally describe their sensations as they happen, to be interpreted later. I personally would do a combination of drawings and words, as I would see more than hear or smell or anything else. There were times when I felt a change in temperature, or I guess I should say that I sensed that it was colder where I was imagining I was than in the room I was actually sitting in. I did not in fact feel cold in the room where I physically was, but I knew somehow that it was colder at the other place, and I jotted down a word or a few words to that effect. I had my eyes open the entire time. It wasn't like I was in a trance. It was just me focusing on whatever came to mind after being asked to describe what was in a given envelope. That was one of the things that attracted me to remote viewing and which caused me to feel safe doing it in the beginning. There was no spooky supernatural element to it. We didn't sit in a darkened room. We didn't light candles. We didn't hold hands. It would work as well sitting under harsh fluorescent lights as it would sitting outside under a tree or with all the lights turned out. You didn't have to drink a potion. You didn't have to cast a spell. You didn't have to stare into a crystal ball for it to work. You just sort of casually thought about what was in the envelope, jotted down random notions that popped into your head, and then started deciding what to have for dinner that night. It was just an interesting thing to do in the afternoons and on the weekends. It didn't feel like we were doing anything epic or important, and we certainly didn't regard ourselves as wizards or sorcerers. We didn't even regard ourselves as risk takers. We thought this was as safe as watching TV, just another modern pastime and nothing more. Looking back on it, I think that what we were doing was far more dangerous than playing with the Ouija board or conjuring demons. We were casually and carelessly fiddling around with the very fabric of reality itself. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John chapter 1 verse 1. One of the strangest aspects of all of this to me is that one can write down longitude and latitude or a GPS address on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, and then people will see or sense images or ideas or things physically nearby the location that the code is referring to. I still wonder why nobody while remote viewing ever senses the GPS address itself, since that is what is in the envelope, not the location or the time in history. The famous painter Rene Magritte was famous for trying to point out that art is not the images it depicts. One time he painted the image of a pipe, then wrote, "This is not a pipe," in large letters on the painting itself. It's not a pipe, it's the image of a pipe. Same as the word pipe is not a pipe, but is an indication or a road sign pointing toward the actual object of the pipe itself. That may be true, But it's not true in the world of remote viewing. In the world of remote viewing, you can write the word Dogman down on a piece of paper and put it in an envelope, then ask people to view what is in that envelope, and you will actually be placing those people at risk. They will not view a word. They will not view a concept. They will view an apparently living creature with the kind of consciousness that can understand what you're doing when you remote view it. They will view a consciousness so powerful that it can remote view them right back. It's like being haunted by a living thing that's only partially there. So that's basically what happened to me. Mr. A just announced that we were going to try something a little different that day, and we should be open to receiving different kinds of responses than usual. Didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but it turned out to be something he probably should have given us a much bigger warning about. We didn't know it, but he was asking us to remote view a Dogman, even though he didn't know if Dogman even existed. And if it did exist, he didn't know what it was. In my opinion, that's kind of a huge upgrade from finding a carved wood hummingbird statue buried in a park, you know? Being that I don't get how my imagination allows me to see things that exist in reality in other places, I have no idea what actually happens during the process of remote viewing. If I'm then asked to view something that might or might not even be real, does that mean my imagination and or the imaginations of the other remote viewers might be helping to make something real, which previously had only been mythical? In other words, could this experiment, or some earlier one like it, have actually created the Dogman or the werewolves in the first place? Or did the request to view Dogman just tune us in to one of the creatures? If so, why that Dogman? Does that mean it's the only Dogman? A typical Dogman? Was that the average Dogman, the closest Dogman? And if it was a Dogman I created with my imagination, then were all the previous reports of Dogman going back through history retroactively created after I brought this one to life with my imagination? Did my mind rewrite all of that history to include werewolves in order to fit in the Dogman I was asked to remote view? What I saw was a man-like being, 7 foot tall or taller, with the head of a wolf, tall, pointed canine ears, huge fangs in an elongated snout, and fur covering its entire body. I saw someone roughly humanoid, but with feet like those on the hind legs of a wolf or a dog. Its fur was a dark gray or an off black. The creature seemed very alive, and not like a costume or a special effect in the slightest. It was imperfect. It had minor scars and bruises like a real animal would. It wasn't a man in a costume, and it wasn't a UFO occupant. This was a creature that lived in the forest I saw him in. He had been in those woods his entire life, and there could be no questioning that. On the other hand, this was no normal woodland animal. When I've seen deer or squirrels while remote viewing, they don't react to my presence because to them, I'm not even there. But when I hovered above the Dogman looking down at him, he knew I was there, and he turned and looked right at me. I remember trying to fly back in space away from him, desiring to put more distance between us, as though I were astrally traveling to wherever the creature was. I don't remember ever consciously being aware of that kind of a sensation before, but it felt extremely like descriptions of out-of-body experiences that I've read about. I was concerned that the Dogman would reach out with one of his long arms and snatch me right out of the air. He didn't do that, but I remember my sensation that he might, and my abject terror at the idea of it. If he had, would his massive hand-like claw have been able to hold on to anything? Or would it have been snatching at air? I'm still curious about this, but not curious enough to try the experiment again. Rather than imagining myself moving away from the monster, I realized I could just terminate the session and stop thinking about it. It was never something I had to worry about when Mr. A sent us on errands to locate carved wooden ducks buried in small boxes. They never turned around and looked at you. I walked out of the remote viewing session on the spot. I didn't even say goodbye to anyone, and that's very unlike me. I was afraid to be there any longer. I felt like the dogman was coming for me, and that I'd better run. It was true. He was coming for me, but there was nothing that I could run to hide from, due to the way it was stalking me. That night, I had a dream that I'm not sure was entirely a dream. The dogman was walking through the woods behind me. Neither of us were running, and in fact we seemed to be quite used to each other. I was walking home, and I knew he was following me. I climbed in through the window to my bedroom, and I climbed into my bed, which was already drenched with my own sweat. I was cold and clammy as I shivered under the covers, feeling my body heat draining away. A breeze blew in through the window, making my shivering truly uncomfortable. I thought about getting up to close that window, but then I saw the face of the wolf creature filling the frame. It climbed inside. There was nothing I could do as the werewolf man climbed in the window and stood there, staring at me. I kept closing my eyes and opening them, hoping that the creature would be gone the next time I opened my eyes. Eventually, I didn't see it anymore, but I knew it was still there. My girlfriend woke up at dawn and found me shaking all over, but afraid to get out of bed. The dogman was in the room with us, but it was invisible. I knew it sounded illogical, but I also knew it was true. My girlfriend had her friend who claims to be a shaman come and cleanse the house, and after a couple of tense weeks had passed, I realized that I hadn't ever sensed the presence of the dogman again. Maybe the creature saw that I had given up remote viewing and that I was no longer a threat to bother him ever again. Or maybe I was imagining it all, and the shaman's efforts had a placebo effect on me. I feel like I understand why some cultures don't want to say the name or even think about certain negative entities. I can see now exactly how these kinds of things could actually be drawn to you if you focused your attention on them. I don't know how it works, but I do know that it works. It might be something we call magic, but I think that sometime in the future, once humanity has progressed enough to understand how it works, we'll discover that it had a completely logical explanation behind it the entire time. For these reasons and more, I choose not to engage in remote viewing exercises any longer, and I'd advise anyone listening to this to exercise great caution as well. If I'm going to daydream from now on, I want it to be about a brighter future, or I want it to be about what I'm going to have for dinner. No more thinking about items buried in parks, and most of all, no more thinking about monsters and things that go bump in the night. And that's because I remote viewed a dogman, and it remote viewed me back. We've got another mind-expanding dogman story in a second, but first allow me to thank this episode's executive producer, Sheila Paulette Roberts. Executive producer Sheila, OMG, I really feel ya. Sheila Paulette, she helps keep us out of debt. Please join us in thanking Sheila Paulette Roberts for making this episode possible. In return, we sent her links to watch our secret Sunday scary uncensored stories, tales far too wild to tell on this channel. She also gets to see our archive of over 15 hours of uncensored Dogman stories, and so can you. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or else click the join link under this or any of our videos. And now, for our second Dogman head scratcher story of the day. This one's title asks the musical question: are Bigfoot and Dogman the same thing? Dear Scary Stories NYC, I saw a dogman walk out of my family's old barn at dusk, and my wife saw a Bigfoot enter it at dawn, as in the very next dawn. This sequence of events has me questioning what cryptids really are. It has me asking the question, are various cryptids actually the same thing, wearing different masks? So let me get back to what happened, or at least gave the illusion of happening, at our old barn. It's mostly disused these days, but there is still a lot of hay in the hayloft from when we used to have horses and other animals living on our land. There are farm tools in there which sometimes get stolen. I personally don't care about this, but my wife has a garden and mini farm behind the house, and she actually uses some of those old tools sometimes. For that reason, she's been on me to figure out how to lock up the old place for years. When a hoe or a rake or some such thing went AWOL a while back, she finally put her foot down and sent me back there to take a look at the situation and come up with a plan to secure her valuable hay and shovels. Needless to say, I wasn't in the mood to do this, and I grumbled on my way to check out the barn that evening before it got too dark out to see anything. Before I could get closer than 40 feet, though, the barn door burst loudly open, and out ran a bipedal dogman. It was dark and broad-chested. It seemed to be entirely covered in dark fur, and it even had a tail, although not a long one. I saw it run for maybe a maximum of 3 seconds, and this thing must have covered 90 or 100 feet in that time. I heard it crashing off into the woods, even from way back where I was. I ran back to the house with my tail between my legs and told everything to my wife. I told her I'd hire some pest or animal control person to come out and inspect the barn and area, and then suggest to us professionally what we should do about this situation. I told her I refused to go out there alone because it was unsafe. Not only that, but I forbade her from going out there as well. So, the next morning before dawn, my wife went out to the barn alone while I slept the sleep of the ignorant back at home. I didn't get to rest my brain for long, though, because she ran home and woke me up to tell me that she saw Bigfoot walking into our barn before dawn, and it was up to me to go chase him out of it. Now, I've never been known as being that smart. I was never valedictorious at school, or however you say it, but I'm not so stupid that I'll run into a building that I think a Sasquatch is inside of. Nobody outside of a low-budget horror movie character would think that made sense to do, but don't try to tell that to my wife. So when the animal capture people showed up and heard one impossible story from me about a wolf that walked on its hind legs, and another unlikely tale from my wife about an 8-foot-tall ape-like yet intelligent being, he had but one simple question for us. Do you guys really still need this barn? Because if it was causing trouble to still have it there, couldn't we move the farming tools into our garage and throw out the hay? If we just pulled the barn down, then we wouldn't have to worry about animals settling into it, either ones this guy considered real or the kinds that we were actually seeing. He recommended a relative of his that could do the job cheap for us if we can wait till the weather gets a little warmer. It looks like we're only going to have to live near that weird haunted barn for about another month or so with luck. Now, as to what my wife and I saw, I don't think it could have been what we thought we were seeing. We couldn't possibly have two creatures like this on our land, so I think we're seeing the same thing, yet thinking we're seeing something different. Maybe this is something that's able to send out scrambled signals to our brain. Maybe it's a shaman able to control our minds, or maybe it's a technology able to control the light that bounces off of it. After all, when we see something, we're really seeing the light bouncing off of the object, similar to how a bat hears what bounces off of surfaces around it in all directions. If light bounces off of something, then we may notice it, and if sound bounces off of something, then a bat may, quote, see, quote, it there in space. But if we are able to absorb light that hits us and send out different light messages in the same way that the currently experimental so-called invisibility cloak is able to do, then wouldn't we, in theory, given sophisticated enough technology, be able to project outward any image we chose? Sort of like adapting an avatar in a virtual world, or maybe exactly like doing that. I'm assuming that someone either has developed a far more advanced version of the tech that is currently primitive to most of us in 2021, or else that a biological creature is able to cause this to happen in some natural way as a sophisticated form of camouflage. It reminds me of stories of people who say they saw Bigfoot piloting a spacecraft. Maybe they saw some scrawny alien or nerdy scientist flying the craft, but he was doing it while wearing his Bigfoot avatar. And this brings me full circle to ask the question directly. Did my wife and I see the exact same thing or being, but was it wearing a different avatar each time we viewed it? There's just no way these two creatures could share the same turf. One would have scared the other off by now. There's something unnatural going on where we live. I may be onto something with my theories, or I may be way off base, but there's something way out of the ordinary going on around here in either case. I hope demolishing the barn drives whatever is causing this away, but I know that for the rest of my life I'll be wondering, are Bigfoot and Dogman the same thing? 2 Tennessee Dogman stories. Story number 1, The Dogman of Darden, or I nearly ran over a dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am a lifelong resident of Tennessee, and I swear I have never heard of anything like Dogman living in our fine state. However, in the past 6 weeks, I have seen a dogman, quite possibly the same dogman, twice while driving on US Highway 412 in that area over near the fish store. I was heading west both times, driving toward the Pentecostal church, but not that far yet. The creature must live very near to that spot, as I saw him at 2 completely different times of the day, in that exact location, both instances. The first time I saw the beast, I was not sure I was actually seeing anything. I tried to tell myself that it was an optical illusion, but I was almost certain I saw a dark, dog-headed man running bipedally along the edge of the woodline to my left. To be clear, I was driving in one of the lanes furthest to the right, and I had to look across not just 2 lanes of traffic, then a grass partition, then Darden Lane, but then I had to look past that to see the shadowy figure racing just on my side of the trees. I noticed him out of the corner of my eye, then I turned to see him run behind some foliage and disappear from my view. This was the night before New Year's Eve, or actually I suppose I should say it was early in the morning on New Year's Eve itself. I don't remember the exact time, but dawn was just beginning and the sky was starting to turn colors and get ready to brighten up. You can understand why I told myself at the time that I was seeing things, as I was tired. I couldn't wait to get home to go to bed. Also, the lighting is weird at that time of the morning, and I could have been seeing any number of things besides a giant, hairy, dog-headed man. It wasn't until the second and quite definitively real sighting that I was certain that the first one had even happened. I almost ended up with the dogman smeared across my front bumper. In my peripheral vision during that first sighting, I was thinking that I was seeing a man the color of a dark shadow racing along the edge of the trees. I wasn't certain that I wasn't seeing a moving shadow itself. It was only in the last split second as I saw it dart behind some tree trunks and foliage that I realized this might be a very swift of foot bipedal creature or person. I wondered if it might be a very tall Native American shaman, or possibly someone going through a coming-of-age ritual of some sort which involved them covering themselves in black body paint, or else animal furs dyed a very dark color. I saw that it had dog-like ears up on top of its head like wolf ears as it ran away, and I saw that it had a short tail, but nothing in that brief instant told me that those were living ears, or a living tail. They could have both been animal skins or a costume as far as I knew. For a few days I was asking everyone in the area that I knew if they were aware of any local native tribes or possibly a men's group that might be meeting in the area to perform certain kinds of rites or rituals. And if it wasn't either of them, then I asked around to see who else might have vision quests or rites of passage that might explain what I seemed to have witnessed. Nobody had any answers for me, but at least nobody thought I was crazy. Yet, questioning what strangers might be doing in your local forests is still considered a sane thing to do, but I was soon to learn that it's considered insane to wonder if it might be something non-human cavorting about just out of view of us normal folk. Now let's fast forward to my second and far more significant sighting. This was basically a Dogman close encounter of the third kind. This time, the creature and I came face to face. Again, I was driving along US Highway 412 headed in the direction of that church, and once again it was dark out. I was driving home around 10 or 10:30 at night, but the roads were empty. The creature did not emerge from the direction of the fish store on Darden Lane this time. I had been watching that area each time I drove past ever since the first incident, hoping to see the phenomena again and understand better what it was. Maybe that's why I was so unprepared to see the Dogman run out in front of me from out of the woods directly to my right. I slammed on the brakes and I screamed as I saw myself skidding directly toward an ugly collision with a huge man-like animal that, in that brief instant, stared at my approaching car like a deer frozen in the headlights. So, what was I about to collide into? Well, it was a he, first of all, and of that there could be no doubt. It was like a man on its chest, but a wolf on its head, its back legs bent like the devil's own, and it had a tail that swatted a small swarm of tiny flies back and forth around what I imagine was one smelly old dog butt. It was all black, except for its terrified eyes blinding me with light reflecting from my own headlights. In the next instant, instead of becoming pizza meat in front of my eyes, the dog-headed man-thing's eyes narrowed and it flew into a completely unexpected kind of action. Somersaulting up onto my hood, the dog-faced humanoid spread its arms out so that it held its animalistic-looking hands at each upper corner of the outside of my windshield. It had somehow spread out the impact of hitting into the car that way and stabilized itself with its face pushed sideways against my windshield, staring into my eyes with supernatural-looking orbs of sheer anger. The car finished braking, and the Dogman worked with the natural momentum to somersault backward the way he had come, landing, of course, on his hind legs that seemed designed to handle far more than even the strongest human legs ever had. This was like some sort of satanic super athlete from hell. In fact, that's as good a thing to call it as anything else. So, then there came that strangest moment of my life so far. It was just me, the Dogman, and the flies swarming around the backside of that Dogman. We all just stood there, staring at each other. Well, not the flies, but you know what I mean. The Dogman stared at me, looking kind of annoyed that he almost got run over. I, on the other hand, was shouting out pathetic apologies as though the creature understood English. I felt the same as I would if I had almost slammed into a human being. I felt terrible about it. I mean, this creature had not been scratched at all and had endured the situation gracefully, but I was raised to feel guilty about every single thing that happens in my life, so I said, I'm sorry. Something about my behavior was a turn-off to that Dogman. He snarled, and he got into this unhappy-looking body posture where I instinctively shut up and sunk down lower behind the steering wheel. I might have been locked safely inside of 2 tons of metal, glass, and steel, but that didn't seem to matter to my bladder. I feel the need to reiterate that I did not feel so frightened as to lose control of myself during the incident. I lost it after the incident when I realized that I had gotten the Dogman angry at me. That's how scary that thing was. I thought it was the end for me. I thought it was going to break into my car and finish me off. And when it leaped up onto my hood a second time, I fainted. I literally passed out behind the steering wheel parked in the left lane on the highway that night. I woke up to beeping from a car, not from behind, but a guy had pulled up to the right of me and beeped until I woke up. Then he asked me if I was okay, and I really didn't know what to tell the fella. I asked him if he had seen any strange-looking people when he pulled up, and he asked me if I'd been drinking. It didn't seem as though anything good would come out of continuing that conversation, so I thanked him for waking me up, and then I drove off, never having explained any part of it to him. If you're listening to this show, fellow traveler, thanks again for waking me up and sending me on my way. I suppose you figured out by now that the thing that made me faint dead away in the middle of a road was the Dogman of Darden. Don't go anywhere, we've got another Tennessee Dogman story coming up in a second, but first allow me to thank today's executive producer, Tim Sturgill. He was here, then he was gone, but now he's back to carry on like traffic. When it starts to mergele, we always welcome back Tim Sturgill. Please join me in thanking Tim Sturgill for making this episode possible, and in return, we share with him our secret Sunday uncensored story links, not to mention our 15 hours of archived uncensored Dogman stories. You can see them too. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or do what Tim Sturgill did and join our channel memberships by clicking the join link under this or any of our videos. And now, here's our second of 2 Dogman stories, both set in Tennessee. In fact, this one took place only 10 miles north of the last story, and that would explain why we call it the Dogwood Lake Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. About 10 miles north of Darden is Dogwood Lake. I've been there a couple of times, but I don't in this story, actually. In this one, we come as close to it as the highway that runs closest to it, which is called Corinth Road. You can't even see the lake from the road. You can only see the densely packed trees between the two. And on one dark night, when I was driving on Corinth Road, my girlfriend and I saw an upright walking canine, or a North American Dogman. I don't date that girl any longer. Her family moved out of this area about 3 years ago now. I don't think that she would mind me mentioning that she was actually named after the wolf, and her name was Lupe. That isn't just an interesting coincidence, it actually ties into this story. You see, Lupe was named after a very specific kind of wolf. The titular lake in this story, Dogwood Lake, is just east of Corinth Road, which at that point, where we were driving, is located just southeast of Natchez Trace State Park. Natchez Trace State Park is the location where Lupe's parents claim they were camping when their camp was invaded by what they call a werewolf spirit when they tell the story to Lupe. She explained to me, though, that when they use the word spirit, they mean that this was an out-of-the-ordinary creature, not just an animal or a man, but something more. They did not mean that they were haunted or that they had encountered a ghost. I asked her why they didn't just call it a werewolf, and she said they wanted to make it clear that this was something real. I think the term werewolf is a Western one, possibly. Maybe they meant it that way. It was like the mythic Western werewolf, but it was a nature spirit, not just a fictional character in a Western play or book or movie. At any rate, whatever they meant, the story is that their camp was invaded by an upright walking werewolf spirit, and that they gave it food after it threatened them. After bribing him with the meat, they left the location and reported that the hungry werewolf spirit followed them for some time. They could hear it in the woods pursuing them, but they couldn't see it any longer. It created a great deal of tension until the two made their way back to civilization. Any wolf can be terrifying if it becomes your enemy, I was told by Lupe, but this was the most frightening kind of wolf that had ever walked the earth. It stood up like a man. It was black, all over, and it had piercing, bright, golden red eyes, filled with the light of another world different from our own. It was not a normal dog, nor was it a normal man. It hungered, so it was alive, but at the same time it didn't seem to be living the same kind of life as the rest of us. It either was a superior kind of life form or it came from another kind of place. Nevertheless, giving the creature all their meat bought them time to run away from it and live to tell the tale to their daughter, born a little more than 8 months after the shocking event of the Wolfman's appearance in their camp. This all happened when Lupe's mother was bearing her, but before she even knew that she was pregnant. When the young couple later discovered that they were expecting, they decided that if it was a girl, they were going to name her Lupe after the werewolf spirit. Lupe claims her family is not very superstitious, but the appearance of the werewolf spirit was so striking and so unforgettable. They both realized that this was a remarkable visitation, and also that they were extremely lucky to have survived it. It added a sense of meaning to all their days afterward. They were spared, they felt, because they had a mission left to fulfill on Earth, and the next thing they knew, they had a daughter, Lupe, and they realized their mission was to raise her. It all seemed as though it were meant to be, and so Lupe grew up feeling that there must be some significant reason for her life. Her parents would not have been spared by the Dogman 2 decades earlier if her life were just some meaningless thing. That was kind of what I liked about Lupe. She expected every moment to be interesting in one way or another. I don't mean she was spoiled. I mean, if I wasn't being interesting, then she would be instead. There was never a dull moment around her, and we had a fun time together for about 6 months. After that, we both got new jobs that took up much of our lives, and we drifted apart before her family moved. But this story happened when the two of us were still very happy together. So, what happened is that we were driving up Corinth Road with the lake somewhere to our right through the woods, and the park where the first incident occurred somewhere off, forward, and to the left. Lupe stopped talking about whatever it was we were talking about mid-sentence. I looked over to see if she was all right, and I saw her face looking pained and confused, as though she were hearing fingernails on a chalkboard. "It's coming from the direction of the lake," she said, and I asked her, "What is?" I told her I couldn't hear anything strange, since I still thought she was speaking about some painful sound she was hearing. And then I saw what she was talking about. I mean, it had to be what she was talking about. I agree that it doesn't make sense that she could have known, but by the same token, she did know, and I was there to see it with my own eyes. Out of the trees, coming from the direction of the lake as she had said, came a tall, dripping wet, hair-covered man. It could have been because its hair was wet, but the man or man-like creature seemed to be a color as dark as something could be. If not for its bright white predator teeth and the glowing inhuman-looking eyes, I might have thought I was seeing a living shadow. Lupe pointed at it, as though she were pointing out an interesting roadside attraction. Well, I suppose she was doing that. Afterward, I asked her if she sees the monster often. She insisted, no, that was her first time. I was like, come on, baby, tell me the truth. I'm not your first to see the werewolf with you, am I? But she insisted she had never seen the werewolf before. It had visited her parents, and then it visited me and her, and that was it. She told me that it meant something life-changing, same as it had when the spirit appeared for her parents. I got scared. I asked her if she was expecting a baby, and she said no, but I kept asking the question. I got her a home pregnancy test, and that also said she was not expecting. I really was not ready to be a father, and so once Lupe started telling me that the Dogman sighting proved that she and I were meant to be, I got nervous, and I pushed her away. I said, listen, we saw a Dogman alongside the road. We drove past it, and that was it. The only thing that proved was that human beings don't know everything that lives in the forest. That's all. To Lupe, though, it was what she had lived her entire life waiting for. She knew that when she saw that creature, she would understand her life path from then onward. Seeing the monster with me meant that we were going to have a child together in her mind, same as it had meant when the werewolf spirit had visited her parents. There was no other interpretation for her, and she fell into a kind of bliss, feeling that her life now had a purpose. When Lupe eventually understood that I was terrified of the idea of the kind of commitment she was demanding of me, it drained a lot of the life out of her. Now, the sighting of the dogman, which she had predicted seconds before it happened, meant absolutely nothing more than a squirrel sighting. I had stripped her world of meaning. I had torn the happiness out of her internal existence. I remember we hadn't seen much of each other for a couple of weeks when she emailed a poem to me that she had written. I only remember this one part. When life shows you its meaning, and you decide to turn your eyes, then there's no truth for gleaning, and only shock, but not surprise. It made me feel like a coward hiding from my destiny, but I was not responsible enough yet to start a family. To me, what happened to us was not a sign or a portent. It was a cryptid sighting. We saw a monster together. When Patterson and Gimlin saw a Bigfoot together, they didn't think that meant they should have a baby. They thought it meant that they saw a monster. And yet, I feel guilty to this day that I may have taken the wrong path when I steered away from Lupe. Maybe I should have tried to do things her way. I couldn't do it though, because I didn't want to feel that my life was being run by the Dogwood Lake Dogman. The Dogman in the Snowdrift. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I once got shouted at and chased by a dogman while I was out hiking in the winter. I'd like to tell you about it if you would like to hear. This was about 10 years ago now, and I was on winter vacation from college. My dorm mate, who we can call Dale, had gotten me into hiking, and on that vacation we were hiking on a snowy hillside somewhere in the country in Pennsylvania. I really don't remember where. I went to college there for 5 years, but have never been back since. Honestly, I find that entire state a little on the spooky side, but I'm saying that with respect. So, to cut directly to the event that happened to us, we were hiking on top of this snowy ridge with another equally snowy ridge above us and to the right. We hadn't seen another human all day. It was glorious. And then suddenly, we heard a moaning howl behind us that caused us both to quake in our boots. We turned around, and we could see it. The thing was already that close to us. It was a bright day, and we could clearly make out a dark form against the white snow. I know Dogman is supposed to be a nocturnal creature, but I'm telling you, that was what we were seeing. It was a very agitated, angry, and tall man, covered in what looked from a distance to be his own fur, growing out of his own body. It was not a Bigfoot or abominable snowman, though. This was a man-like thing, with a canine-shaped head, and he was screaming and moaning like some kind of animal that came from the nether region itself. My friend Dale, who should have known better, started shouting back at the dogman as though that would scare him off. It did no such thing. What it did do was start what I guess can be termed an avalanche. Don't worry, I didn't die. It was not a full-fledged avalanche, including rocks and so forth. It was just that all our shouting had shook loose a lot of snow on that upper ridge, and it fell on top of Dale and me faster than we could react. I had gasped in shock a split second before the wall of white enveloped me and turned the world pretty dark, holding my breath in panic, and also because there was no air to breathe inside the sliding snowdrift. I rode along with the soft and wet mountain of white until we finally came to a wet and cold stop. I was able to turn my head until I saw one area of the snow, slightly lighter in color, and I knew that had to be the up direction. It took some effort, but I was very close to the surface anyway, and I sort of swam up to the top. It was less than a minute before I was breathing real air again and worming my way out of that snow pile. Almost as soon as I had climbed to the top, and long before I had caught my breath, I saw a part of the snow moving slightly, going up and down just a little bit. Dale. It had to be Dale, and I needed to help him get free before he suffocated or died of hypothermia or some other horrible thing. I dove onto that patch of snow and began grabbing clumps of it with my bare hands and hauling them up. And then, from behind me, I heard a familiar voice crying for help. That was confusing. It sounded like Dale. But if Dale was behind me, then who was I digging out? Looking down between my two legs, I saw the huge head of the Dogman shake the melting snow free from its head long enough that it was able to extend that head and neck upward out of the snow, snapping like a turtle at my personal privates and causing me to leap in the air in self-defense. I was shaking all over in utter panic as I dug Dale out. Both of us watched the Dogman begin to struggle free. As Dale and I ran away, we saw his shoulders emerging from its snowy bonds. We knew he would be loose in just another few minutes, and that was all the head start that we were going to have, so we made good use of it. We never finished our hike that day, taking a shortcut back to where we knew people would be in order to throw the Dogman off our trail. We hoped he wouldn't follow us once we were among enough others, and fortunately we were right. Dale and I are two of the only people who ever lived that can claim that we rolled in the snow with a real-life werewolf. Every time I think back on it, I say another prayer of thanks that I got out uninjured from my encounter with the Dogman in the snowdrift. Henry Lee Dogman wishing you a happy holiday season and asking that you please not go anywhere. We have a Boxing Day Dogman story coming up in a second. First, we would like to thank today's executive producer, whose name is Dan D'Amico. Dan D'Amico, he's no Antico. In fact, we think he's our amigo. Please join us in thanking Dan D'Amico for helping to make this episode possible. In exchange for his kind donation, we sent him links to see our secret, uncensored Scary Dogman stories that we put out each Sunday night. We have an archive of over 15 hours of Scary Dogman stories far too wild to ever tell on this channel. You can see them too by joining our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or else by clicking the join link under this video to become a YouTube channel member. And now, it's time for our second wintertime Dogman story, which is in fact a Boxing Day story. And that would explain why we call it the Boxing Day Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I want to tell you a story about the one time I saw a cryptid. It was a Dogman, and I saw it on the day after Christmas, which is also referred to as Boxing Day in some places. It would be impossible to understand if I didn't give you some background first, though. My family lived near Manton, Michigan, in a wooded area outside of town. We were a short drive and a not-so-long walk from whatever we needed, but still the place felt secluded and as though it were in the country. Really, we were on the edges of the suburbs, but in my opinion, it felt like the best of both worlds to me. In fact, to my whole family. We enjoyed being there. I'd say we were joyous about being there given the few places we had been forced to stay before then. We had moved there after Dad got a better job, so I know I always thought of Manton as good luck. I think we all did. Well, at least until that incident happened with the immense, terrifying Dogman. My mother had one British grandparent, and she used that as an excuse to enforce her weird and random superstitions on the rest of us. They weren't superstitions, though, she would claim. They were old British traditions that we were upholding and continuing. Never wear white after Labor Day. Never point at a person, or they might die. You must kiss people every time they pass under mistletoe, or you will bring bad luck on yourself. But the one superstition, the one old British tradition that my mother forced us all to observe was the complete breaking down and removal of anything related to Christmas beginning at dawn on Boxing Day. My mother always forced the entire family to work on Boxing Day, completely dismantling everything related to the happiest day of the year and storing it all away in the attic and in the shed way out in the back by the woods. My other friends actually got to have a day off enjoying the presents they had gotten the day before, but my mother hated Christmas so much, she felt so strongly about observing this old British custom, that we weren't allowed to play a single game we had gotten until the ornaments, lights, and decorations were all put away, and the Christmas tree was thrown out in the garbage near the woods off the side of the house. She reveled in the sight of our beautiful tree lying on its side with the other garbage, dying slowly and silently while waiting to be crushed and driven to the dump. Nothing made my mother happier than knowing that the most wonderful time of the year was done and wouldn't come back for another 11 months or so. Sometimes on Boxing Day night, she would leave the dinner table and go stand staring out the window at the tree piled up with the garbage, and she would giggle to herself uncontrollably. As much as we kids loved Christmas, that was how much my mother loathed it. There were two especially memorable Boxing Days in my youth. There was the year when my sister foolishly wore an ugly Christmas sweater on the day after Christmas, for one. This completely triggered my mother into a full rant-style lecture about how the Christmas season ends at midnight on Christmas Day, and that wearing Christmas fashions after Christmas was not gonna fly with people living under her roof. The other memorable Boxing Day was the one in which our yearly ritual of rushing to destroy the holiday mood was interrupted by the very singular and un-Christmas-like presence of the North American upright walking canid, or dogman. So imagine you're the son in this family I've described. It's your job to carry the garbage back to the garbage area, which was all the way in the back of our property by the shed at the edge of the wood line. I guess we placed the garbage back there so that we didn't have to smell it, but I don't know. It had been how we did things since before I was born. Maybe that was another old British custom too. It was also my job to haul the garbage from all the way back there to the sidewalk in the front of the house on garbage pickup day. But this isn't a story about garbage pickup day. This is a story about the dogman. Well, you can tell me what happened. I've given you enough background. I was struggling with the Christmas tree, dragging the poor dying friend along behind me, trying not to dig up the grass with the heavy trunk. I remember I was most of the way there to the garbage when I got a splinter, but I don't remember if it was from the tree or a pin left over from one of the decorations. I do remember that it hurt bad, and I dropped the tree to stare at my finger and try to see what was causing me all that pain so that I could pull it out. My attention was completely focused on myself and the scorching pain I was experiencing. I know this because when I, staring downward at my hand held in front of me, saw the feet of a huge bipedal dog walk into my peripheral view, I had not even heard that thing approaching. I tell this story to people in person and they never react the way I did when it happened in real life. I'm not explaining it correctly, I know, so I'll try to tell it to you differently from how I've told it to people in the past. Imagine standing by the woods in the early evening darkness, your worst problem in the world being a splinter in your finger. Then, imagine that in the next second, you are standing in front of a humanoid but not human, giant, whose form dwarfs yours, the way a Great Dane can make a beagle look tiny. I think that when I tell the story and I say there was a big werewolf-type creature close enough that I could reach out and get my hand bitten off by him, people must be visualizing Lon Chaney Jr. wearing his shirt buttoned all the way up and standing on his tiptoes, like in those old black and white movies. This was nothing like that. When I say that the creature was humanoid, I just mean that it was shaped in a lot of ways like a man. I'm trying to communicate that it was not a bear or a gorilla. It was a large humanoid animal covered in fur with a dog-like head. Probably a wolf head would fit more closely than a dog, although it wasn't exactly that either. The ears were taller and pointier than the wolves I've seen, and the eyes appeared to be much larger than any sort of canine I've ever been made aware of. So possibly it wasn't even canine at all, just as I'm pretty sure it wasn't human either. I think it was some third kind of thing that just looked a lot like a giant man with a dog head. The giant part is another thing that I don't think I've explained enough or described adequately. Even if this creature had dropped to all fours, it would still have been taller than I was. Think about that. He didn't have to chase me or bite me or scratch me or anything like that to defeat me in that moment. He could have just fallen forward and that would have crushed me out of existence. You really can't imagine the surprise of that moment, nor could you possibly understand the deep feeling of hopelessness present in that space and time either. Forget about having a painful splinter. You are now about to experience some serious pain, and you have a high percentage likelihood of enduring injuries or far worse in the next few seconds. I backed some steps away, not making eye contact with the creature. It wasn't that I knew not to do that, it was just that he was holding his hand-like claws open to either side of me, and he could have brought them together to either tear up or else just smash my head between them. Each one of those hands or paws or whatever they were larger than my head. The talon-like claws on its hands were as long as my fingers. There were just so many ways this thing could make my life unlivable that I cannot even list them all. The dogman kicked some dirt up into the air in my direction, causing me to back off a bit more quickly and to start coughing in the dusty air. The creature seemed to be telling me to back off, and that was coincidentally something I had a deep desire to do right then. Each backward step I took brought the creature a bit more into focus for me. His size was almost like a second monster unto itself. I had a werewolf in front of me, and he was giant. I can't even guess at a number for the height, but it was bigger than a bear. It was bigger than any man I've ever seen. It was muscle-bound and feral, and it was grunting and exhibiting body postures and movements that indicated it wanted me to continue moving back away from it. By the time I was about 3/4 of the way to the back door of the house, I had begun to feel a sort of empathy for the dog-headed beast. It was allowing me to escape. It was not going to hurt me. It seemed like a Christmas miracle at the time, and I was as excited that the dogman was turning out to be intelligent and thoughtful as I was by the fact that I was in the process of having a real cryptid encounter. I'm not going to say that the fear left me, but much of it had mutated into sheer excitement as the dogman stood his ground and allowed me to leave. When I reached the picnic table we had out back, the dogman suddenly dropped to all fours and began racing, tongue flapping in the breeze, toward me and that back door. He hadn't been allowing me to escape. He had been giving me a head start to make my elimination more sporting. In the second or two that it took me to turn and begin running away, that monster dog must have gained 60 feet on me. I didn't know if I was going to make it. I was going to have to place every step in the right spot, and I was going to have to climb the stairs toward the back door 2 or 3 at a time. If I had a watch in front of me, I would have seen the second hand slow down, because I'm telling you, all of time stretched. That's something time will do for you if you are living out what might be the last few seconds of your entire existence. You are exerting every bit of energy you have to run for your life in a very literal sense, but time is so slowed down that you simultaneously are allowed to remember every single moment of your entire life, sometimes even including pre-birth memories. If you're about to get eaten by a dogman, and you know it, you will remember everything that you ever did that you regret. You will never be more humble than you are when the dogman is chasing you at his top speed. If everybody lived their life as though the dogman were about to do them in, we might have a much kinder world. I raced to the back door, hearing the breathing of that monster in my ears, and toward the end I swear I could smell his panting breath. He was getting that close. I got inside and I nearly locked that door behind me when the dogman hit. He was pushing the door open and I was trying to hold it shut. I was going to lose this battle and I screamed in horror. If that dogman got into our house, he might destroy my entire family. I was bracing my back leg against the wall behind me and trying to get that door closed so that the latch would click. Then I could lock it. My father was the first to react to my shouting, and with his help, the two of us got that door shut. While he asked me what in God's name was going on, that dogman began a vicious barking attack outside. Don't get me wrong, I'd far prefer dogman's bark to his bite, but being barked at by something bigger than a bear is more than a little bit intimidating. I personally witnessed my dad's legs going to jelly so that he had to hold onto the wall to remain standing up. He hadn't even seen the monster. He was only hearing it, and it was making this grown man tremble to the point of being unable to control his own body. That's what it's like, being on the other side of a door from a dogman, and that's why nobody should ever laugh at you if you tell them you've had to deal in person with a werewolf or lycanthrope type entity. Even if you get out completely unscathed, like my father and I did, you don't know what kind of psychological scars it's gonna leave behind. When that dogman outside our door had his fill of ranting at us in dog language, it just turned and walked away. That was that, and we never saw it again. My father just sat there staring at the door for a while, then asked me in a hoarse, raspy voice what that was. I told him, "Dad, it was a really big dog," and he nodded his head in agreement. We never spoke about the incident again. It was the only time I had ever seen my father that frightened. But then again, I can't think of anything I've ever encountered that was even half as terrifying as the Boxing Day Dogman. The Ides of March Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Some people fear the number 13. Others fear black cats. Me? I fear the Ides of March. And I don't care if you call me superstitious either, because I saw the Ides of March Dogman. When I was a kid, my mother would always say, "Beware the Ides of March," so much that she gave me a complex. I didn't even know that Friday the 13th was considered unlucky, but I knew about the Ides of March. If you don't know what I mean, the 15th of March is called the Ides of March. I never knew why back then, but I knew it meant trouble. I would get sick the night of March 14th each year in an effort to get to miss school the following day. And if it fell on a weekend, I tried my best to stay in bed as much of the day as I could manage. Each March 16th morning was greeted by me with glee, because I was never sure if I would live to see it. Yes, it was really that bad. I was kind of messed up about this one day each year. My mother told me that plenty of people shared my fear. In fact, according to her, Tax day used to be March 15th, but they moved it back to April due to so many people like me who feared the Ides of March. So in college, I learned that it's just all from Julius Caesar. It's the day Brutus allegedly betrayed Caesar and stabbed him in the back. I felt cheated that this was all that the Ides of March turned out to be after all those years of build-up in my mind. I felt like there should be some better backstory to it. Something about a curse or ancient space aliens, or at least some witches or wizards or ghosts or something. I decided that was it for me in terms of worrying about the Ides of March. I was done with it. It was a superstition. It was childish nonsense. And it was over. And then I saw the Ides of March Dogman. My first 2 years in college, I dated 5 young women, one after the other. By junior year, I actually went through a period when I enjoyed being alone. I was back to normal in senior year, but in March of my junior year, I was all about seeking out solitude. It was relatively warm that March on the 15th, and I decided to go for a walk through the woods outside of the campus. I found it really invigorating to walk through there, although it was too cold to work on the schoolwork I had brought with me. I couldn't find a rock to sit on that wasn't icy cold, and I hadn't thought to bring something warm and dry to sit myself on. I was actually in the process of figuring out which way was north so that I could head back to school when I saw it. Even in full daylight, that creature found shadows to stand inside. His eyes glowed, but almost nothing else about his features was visible at that point. He was a big fellow, as big as any American football player at least, maybe taller. It had dog-like hind legs, yet it somehow stood up on them, freeing his front legs, apparently, to have evolved into 2 massive gunboats. Even in silhouette, I could already tell that this guy was ripped, and yet he had eye shine, which humans do not have, and he had ears up on top of his head. Last I heard, we don't have those either. I had been looking at the creature for maybe 3 or 4 seconds when it seemed to have decided that the jig was up and that he had been spotted. That didn't make him run away, though. It made him walk forward, toward me. While I thought I saw some curiosity about me in his eyes, I might have been projecting that onto him. I know he bared his teeth at me, and from his fully upright position, I saw him bend over and assume a truly intimidating pose, with his glowing eyes now directly level to my own. I heard a low growling, and I tried to remember what I was supposed to do in this kind of situation. Should I be playing dead? Should I run away? Should I stand still and hope he gets bored easily? I couldn't remember which to do, and I was panicking. Under the tree cover, only parts of him were fully illuminated, but I was too close not to pick up a lot of detail. His fur was a few different shades of gray and reminded me of wolf fur. His claw-like hands looked like they could rip me to shreds, and my heart was beating really fast. Tears started falling down off my chin, and I realized I was crying. It felt as though there were no escape from this situation. I was outmatched, and I was not going to survive this battle. I didn't want to fight, but it seemed that he did, and an increasing sense of doom overtook me. And then some loud construction sound back at campus alarmed the stupid animal, and he ran away. I took that chance to bolt back to school, but it was only sheer luck that allowed me to escape. I don't even know what the sound was, but it certainly wasn't something that would ever hurt the dogman. For him to have run from that shows that sometimes your instincts can be your worst enemy, and your intended prey's best friend. It was only after I got back to my dorm room that I took note of the date, March 15th, the Ides of March. And that's why my childhood fear sticks with me. I can't ever feel normal on the 15th of March because I saw the Ides of March Dogman. Don't go anywhere. We've got 2 more Dogman stories for you in this episode. But first, please allow me to thank today's executive producer, Julie Sadler. You know what I heard about Julie Sadler? That she's badass. She's a real battler. One thing I gotta say about Julie is that we appreciate her truly. Welcome Julie Sadler, our newest channel member. She gets to watch our secret uncensored Sunday stories, as well as our 15 hours of archived uncensored videos, and you can too. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or else do what Julie Sadler did and click the join link under this or any of our videos. And now for the second of our 3 Dogman stories for today. We call this one Dogman Came in from the cold. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Here's something that happened to me this past December during Christmas week. I was staying in my dad's cabin, which is his summer cabin, and there was a bit of a snowstorm. Nobody is around up there in the winter, and I was marooned. I was fine with that though, as I wanted to be alone for Christmas. I had lots of food, more than enough to drink, and I was partying it up alone out there, feeling quite fine, thank you. I would go wander out in the snow barefoot at times until it got too cold and I'd head back inside. If you've swallowed enough to drink, you can stay out for a pretty long time, I discovered. I remember giggling that if anyone came upon my footprints, they would think they were looking at proof of a juvenile Sasquatch in the area. Actually, it was just proof that I was extremely lit that particular evening. I made it back into the cabin, barely able to feel my feet any longer, and I probably didn't close the cabin door correctly. I'm not sure about that part, but it seems likely because of what happened later. I remember standing in front of my fireplace and drying my feet and pants off, warming up. I got so tired once my body warmed up that I wandered upstairs and climbed under the covers for a tasty midwinter nap. As tired as I was, I would not be allowed to catch 40 winks, or even 10 or 15 of them. I heard the wind blow the cabin door open downstairs, and I actually did think about getting up to go down and close it. I didn't get any further with the idea than to think about it, figuring, I was in the middle of nowhere, and the worst that could happen would be that some snow got blown in. Who cares? I just wanted to sleep a little while longer. I just needed a few more minutes of rest. I heard another sound that I tried to tell myself was just the door blowing back and forth in the breeze. It continued too long, and it moved across the floor underneath me until I was about 80% certain that there was somebody downstairs, and they were walking around. Bolting up in bed, I also considered that this person may have been the reason that the door swung open in the first place. Maybe this person had broken in. I didn't believe in personal defense back then. I didn't even have a weapon of any sort in the bedroom to defend myself with. I've changed my mind since then because of these events, but back in December, I was as defenseless as a Canadian woman. I didn't even have any mace on me or bear spray. You see, I felt that I was too mature for violence. I felt I knew better than the ruffians of the world. I told myself that whoever had broken in, surely they could be reasoned with. So I put on my bathrobe and my slippers. I took a deep breath, and I left my bedroom with the intention of meeting the person downstairs and making a friend of him or her. They must be cold. They're probably hungry. Once they know I'm glad to share what I have, certainly I will have made a new and good, lifelong friend. I walked across the landing, heading toward the staircase down to the main level. Loud scrambling erupted from below, and suddenly I was faced with a most remarkable figure, sliding around the corner and glaring up at me. There, already with one dog foot on the bottom step, was the strangest man I had ever seen. Or maybe it was the strangest dog. The guy had to be over 6 feet tall, at least my height, or else possibly even larger. Yes, it stood like a man, but it was completely savage and animalistic. The teeth in this SOB's mouth were larger than my head. I heard it growl, this sound that resembled a tiger more than any kind of dog I'd ever encountered, and my body temperature dropped instantly. Shivering, I ran back to my room and locked it, shakily moving the heaviest things in the room in front of the door to create a blockade. The creature banged on the outside of the door, and I began crying because I knew that it was inevitable, that my blockade was eventually going to fall. The feral monster man was going to get into the bedroom, and I was not going to survive the encounter. I was living out the kind of recurring nightmares I had always had after watching monster movies when I was a kid. I laughed through my tears at my interest in monsters. How ironic that I was going to leave this earth because of a cryptid. Had I brought this on myself? Was I a character in some Rod Serling horror story with an ironic twist ending? I felt so tired all over again. When you know your life is about to end, things can feel a bit overwhelming and depressing. I laid down on the bed and I pulled the covers up over my head. Maybe I would be lucky and get to pass on in my sleep. Or would that be unlucky? I might not even know I was a ghost. I might get stuck in this world forever. Crazy dreams overtook me about being a ghost and being alone in that cabin. In the morning, I woke up to see my blockade still in place. Everything was quiet, so I slowly moved stuff back into its original location, and then I peeked out the door. The coast seemed clear, so I went downstairs to discover quite a few things smashed up, and the front door still open. There were Dogman tracks leading in, and there were Dogman tracks in the snow, heading away. He had left. I spent most of the rest of that day reinforcing the cabin's security and boarding up all the windows on the ground floor. If Dogman wanted to climb to the second story to get in, then I would have to hand it to him and accept the loss. I did what I could, and once again, I just wanted to go to bed. That was the only time I ever saw any sort of cryptid in my entire life. He never showed up again during the rest of my stay out there, and now I'm back in the city. If I hadn't had to spend so much time cleaning the cabin up after the Dogman wrecked things, I wouldn't even still believe that this actually happened. But it did happen, and I'll never forget the night when Dogman came in from the cold. I saw Dogman morph into an owl. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I saw a Dogman, but the sighting was so strange that it has me doubting my sanity. Because when that Dogman noticed that I was looking right at him, he changed form in front of my eyes. Did I really see anything that night? Or have I just lost my mind? This happened last week, but it's already taken me over entirely. I can't think about anything else. It's hard to focus at my work. It's hard to sleep at night. My girlfriend says I should see a therapist, but where would I find the time and money for that? I don't know why I can't have supportive friends who help me through this time, helping me accept what happened to me. But I suppose that's asking for too much, since I don't even really know what happened to me in the first place. There are support groups for all different kinds of trauma, but I don't think anyone has set up therapy to help guys who see Dogman morph into other animals. I'm going to tell you exactly what I remember happening, and I want to make it clear that this was not a dream. It was waking reality. There's a path through the woods that I used to take home when I was visiting my girlfriend. You couldn't pay me to go back into those woods now. I think they're haunted, and you'll see why I'm saying that even if you don't agree with me. As I was walking home that night through the forest, I saw the figure of a very large, very dark man standing there, just behind a tree branch that came up to his chest, but was well over my head. I'm just under 6 feet tall, so I'd guess that branch is maybe 6.5 or 7 feet up. This was a giant figure, not just a tall man. In fact, it was so freakishly large that in spite of the fear that grips you when you're alone in the forest with a giant man, I had to stop and look more closely. I wanted desperately to prove to myself that it was a trick of the shadows and light, that it was an optical illusion of some sort, and not a real giant. It was as I squinted into the night and studied what I was seeing with more care that I saw that this was not a human being at all. It was a dog, but one with a massively wide Arnold Schwarzenegger chest. I could see its eyes faintly glowing in the darkness, and I could make out the silhouette of 2 tall pointed ears on top, looking almost like Batman. And then, over the next few seconds, the visual data I was observing began changing. The body of the dogman seemed to evaporate, but his head remained. Same furry head, same orange eyes, same pointed upright ears on top, and yet they were different somehow. I couldn't understand what I was looking at until I heard. That was the sound of an owl. Walking a few steps closer, I saw that owl, a large one, over 2 feet tall, sitting up on top of that branch that the dogman had been standing behind. I laughed at myself, looking at an owl and somehow misinterpreting it as a dogman. And yet, that was a weird-looking owl. Its feathers resembled brown fur. It really looked so much like the head of the dogman perched on a branch, and yet it was a bird. I was looking right at it. I could be certain. It was a very big, very strange-looking owl. But it was an owl. Satisfied, I turned to continue heading toward home, and then I heard the agitated rustling of leaves and branches and thudding heavy footsteps as though someone large were running away. Looking back toward the owl, I saw it was no longer there. Staring, I could still hear the sound of someone or something retreating in the distance. But it was something on the ground retreating. It was not something flying. There was no sound of flapping wings. It was not the sound of an owl flying away. It was the sound of a large creature running away. I know that there are some people who think that UFO aliens sometimes take on the appearance of owls, or at least seem to, in people's cover memories. I've heard talk of it in podcasts, but it always seemed so crazy to me before. Now, I'm embarrassed to admit, it makes a little too much sense. I think that whatever I saw, whatever its actual appearance is, it was definitely an intelligent creature. It might have even been more intelligent than us humans. Did I see something that actually looks like a dogman? Or did I see something else, taking the forms first of a dogman and then of an owl? Once you see something morph its appearance in front of your eyes, it sets up a chicken and the egg situation. Which came first? What's its natural or real form? Was it a dogman who knew how to appear as an owl? Was it a were-owl? I don't know. And to be honest, as curious as I am, I kinda hope I never find out. Or maybe I do, I don't know. I can't stop thinking about it ever since. I saw a dogman morph into an owl. The Springtime Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was a kid, Dogman would visit our town almost every year in spring. If someone in my family didn't see him, then one of the neighbors usually would. And the springs that went without a sighting, I think he was passing through in those years as well, but we just didn't see him. I'll tell you about a few of the sightings of what we used to call the Springtime Dogman. The first time the Dogman visited us, we only knew it was a large dog or a wolf. We didn't actually see it walking bipedally back then. It was only later on, after seeing him in my father's headlights years later, that we were able to remember this first incident and realize that it had to have been the same Dogman. That night, the family had been hearing a howling sound outside, but the most pained-sounding howling that we had ever heard. It was just heart-wrenching, but it was also pretty scary. My father took the garbage out instead of me that night. He didn't want me to come face-to-face with whatever was making that horrible howling out there. The entire family was shaken up, and in the middle of the night, I heard my older sister come upstairs and ask if she could sleep in bed with Mom. She claimed that someone or something was scratching on the wall outside her room down on the ground floor, and that she was too scared to sleep down there. This put my father in a terrible mood, as he had to get up and go sleep on the couch downstairs. In the morning, my mother discovered that her tulip garden outside my sister's bedroom had been all dug up, as though someone were looking for buried treasure or something. My father said it was that dog or coyote or a wolf or whatever we had been hearing the night before. God only knows what it was trying to dig up. Had it buried something there at an earlier date? The next time we had a visitation from a strange canine, my sister had already moved her bedroom upstairs, and I had taken her old room downstairs in the back corner near the woods. With the rest of the family up on the second floor, on the other side of the house, I could watch TV far later into the night than my parents would have preferred. Those were the days before the internet, and TV was all we had in terms of screens to stare at. Trust me, telephones weren't that interesting back then. I had a small, old black and white TV with a broken aerial and poor reception, but to me in those days, it was my most prized possession. I think I was watching The Honeymooners or The Odd Couple or some other syndicated sitcom that was old even back then, when I heard a sound outside the window in the direction of the trees. I looked out there, but I couldn't really see anything, so I turned off all the lights other than the TV in the room, and I tried squinting out there again. I remember staring into the darkness for a while before noticing the backward reflection of the black and white TV on the window. I could see how blue the light was, and I got lost in watching the reflection of the TV image. When commercials came on, I tried to see how fast I could read the backward words on the screen. I was thoroughly enjoying myself in a way that you could only understand if you were a kid back then, too. We were far more easily amused than kids today, trust me. At any rate, I had completely forgotten the original reason I was staring out the window, which is that I thought I heard something out there. Instead, I was chuckling along with Art Carney or Jack Klugman or somebody when suddenly a dog head rose up from under the window into my face. Not just any normal kind of dog head, though. This one looked like a monster from the movies. It looked like a creature head designed by a professional like Rob Bottin or Tom Savini or someone along those lines. The eyes reflected back at me with a bright bluish-white tinge to it. I pulled backward, lost balance, and literally fell off my bed onto the floor. I got up screaming in fear and was about to run out of the room when I looked back at the window and I saw that nothing was there. Even so, I stood by the bedroom door for a while, hyperventilating, before I would even consider going back inside. The idea occurred to me that I had only seen the head, and then only for a second. For all I knew, it was one of the other kids on the block hiding under the window and holding a mask up to scare me. I put on my bathrobe and slippers and marched to the kitchen door in the back. I was about to go outside and look around to see if I was being pranked, but once I had my hand on the kitchen doorknob, I found myself too afraid to turn the handle and go out there alone. My mind flashed onto going to explain this to my father, but he wouldn't have gotten past the part about me still being up watching TV long after I was supposed to be asleep. I decided my best course of action would be to go back to bed, pull down the shades so that I can't see what's outside the window, and then try to get back to sleep. We finally got a good look at the Dogman the following spring, when our entire family was arriving home after visiting relatives the next state over. It was again around 11 o'clock at night, which seemed to be the witching hour for our Dogman. My father had partied a little hard, so he nodded off in the passenger seat while Mom drove us home. He was just waking up as Mom pulled into our driveway, which ran along one of the sides of our house. Our garage was a separate building from our home, and it was located in the back, right up against the wood line that marked the edge of our property. Before we could reach the garage in the darkness in the distance, we all gasped as an immense athlete covered in animal pelts exploded out of the shadows and into our faces. As it ran into the headlights, we could see that it was not an athlete, though, or any kind of human, and the animal pelt it was wearing was the one it was born with. This was not a man, but it was a man-sized animal that ran toward us on its hind legs, its extremely long forelimbs being held in front of its eyes to block the headlights, which I think were blinding him. As he ran past us, I briefly saw his head in profile, and to me, it looked very much like a wolf or some kind of canine. The body also appeared quite canine, except for the way it was running. Once it had succeeded in passing our car, it dropped to all fours and ran like a greyhound the rest of the way up our driveway and out of our line of vision. To be clear, it ran toward us and past us on its hind legs, but then it dropped to all fours in order to run away. We as a family had no more doubt about what was going on in our neighborhood. We had all seen the animal clearly enough. My mother wanted to move. She didn't feel safe any longer. My father felt it was somebody's escaped dog that had been taught to walk on its hind legs, and that was all. He pointed out that it ran away from our car. It didn't try to get into our car. Sure, we had been startled, but so had that pooch. That was really how my father reacted to our Dogman sighting. Men were still men back in those days. So Dad made up Xerox signs to post around the neighborhood, claiming that he had lost his large black dog that knew how to walk on its hind legs, and that he was offering a $50 reward for its return. My mother was horrified at the idea that someone might get hurt trying to capture that thing to get the $50, and even more horrified at the idea of them delivering it to us. But Dad felt certain that once we saw the dog in the daylight, we'd laugh at ourselves for having been so frightened. Well, things calmed down after that, went back to normal, and Mom stopped talking about moving. Then, in the late spring, we got a call from someone who lived in the next town over who had seen one of Dad's lost dog signs. This guy claimed he saw that walking dog make off with his cat, and he started demanding my father buy his kid a new feline pet. So Dad's plan backfired, and Mom got frightened about this cat-eating monster all over again. I don't remember the Dogman showing himself for a few years, and I'm pretty sure this next sighting happened in the mid-'80s. I was probably 15 or 16 when this one went on, and I think my sister was already away at college. It was that REO Speedwagon era, for better or worse. Nobody my age knew what would actually be cool, so we tried doing stupid things with our hair to see if that would be cool. I remember spending my own money on clothing, which I would never have considered before girls suddenly seemed attractive to me. I tried to dress and act like the guys who I saw the girls talking to on TV. I had no idea what I was doing, but at least I was experimenting and trying to figure life out. So one day, I was wearing clothing that I literally had to borrow money to purchase, money I had not paid back yet, and I had hung out at the mall with a group of kids from my school for a while. When we broke up, people left in groups of 2 or 3, but I was left entirely alone like I was Charlie Brown or something. I really felt like a complete loser, but then I remembered that I couldn't afford to take the bus anywhere anyway, so I couldn't really even afford to go off with any of those kids anyhow. I had to walk all the way home from the mall because I was in debt paying off the clothes I had on that day. Somehow, that cheered me up. The way we parted, none of them would suspect how poor I actually was. I had kept up the illusion of being able to keep up with the Joneses, and that kind of shallow conformity was of vital importance to me during the Reagan-Bush era. As I walked along the highway, breathing in exhaust fumes, I started to get bummed out about what the smoke must be doing to my outfit. I couldn't afford to bring these clothes to the cleaners after all. So you know where this is leading, right? All roads lead to Dogman, at least during the springtime in our town. I decided to do the thing that always leads to trouble in cryptid stories. I decided to take a shortcut. The thing is, I didn't realize I was in a cryptid story yet, so I thought I was just saving myself time. Out by the highway, it had at least been dry. The rain we had a few days earlier had already dried up out in the open where the sun could beat down on it. Under the heavy tree cover, however, the ground was muddier, and there were puddles to watch out for. Although technically I might be shaving some distance off my trek, the going was slow, and I was forced to exert myself to make any progress at all. I knew I was getting sweaty and ruining my clothes, and I was already wondering who I could borrow money from to have them laundered. That was when I heard a growling sound behind me. You know what was there. I don't even have to tell you, but I'll tell you anyway. It was a dog-headed, hairy man covered in pitch-black fur, glaring at me and displaying his immense yellowish-white teeth. For my approval, the man was crouched down, 3 of 4 limbs on the ground, but as he growled, he rose to a standing position in much the same way that a man would. In short, I was a goner. This is the point in the story where I cleverly came up with a way to distract the dogman as I dashed for home, making it to safety in a way that only a true boss could manage. Well, in my dreams at least. What actually happened is I fainted. I assume I fainted because I don't remember anything between seeing the dogman standing up and me waking up hours later on the forest floor, covered in mud. I felt like I had a bad hangover, but other than that I seemed to be uninjured. The dogman left me alone when I was unconscious, so maybe playing dead is a good strategy to use with them. I'm not giving that out as advice though, because that might possibly be the worst thing to do. All I know is that while I was unconscious, the only thing that messed with me was the mud on the forest floor. I moved away from that town in my 2nd year of college, but I moved back in when my mom passed on and she left the house to me about 5 or 6 years ago. I was gonna sell it, but it's conveniently enough located to the other places I sometimes need to be, so I've just sort of adapted to being here again. Nobody in my family has seen the dogman since about 3 years after that mud incident, and that one was just a brief sighting of him crossing a 2-lane blacktop about 10 miles from here. It's possible that his migration patterns changed over a decade ago, and it's quite likely that he never comes this way at all any longer. Yet still, every time I drive around the area, heck, every time I even go out into the backyard, I think back on that immense, mysterious beast out there. I think about it, and I wonder if I will ever again lay my eyes upon the springtime dogman. Don't go anywhere, we've got another springtime Dogman story coming up in a second. But first, please allow me to thank this episode's executive producer, Josh. Our executive producer has the name of Josh. We think he's badass. Oh my gosh, he's trippier than Hieronymus Bosch. That's the man who's known as Josh. Please join me in thanking the one and only Josh for making this episode possible. And in return, Josh gets to see all of our weekly Sunday night secret uncensored Dogman stories, far too wild to tell on this channel. Not to mention our 15 hours of archived scary uncensored Dogman stories as well. You can view these too by merely joining our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or else by doing what Josh did and clicking the join link under this or any of our videos. PQ River will have more information for you about that at the end of the show, but right now it's time for our second Dogman story of the episode. This is another one that took place in the springtime, and we call it The Egg Foo Young Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story for you about the Dogman that happened almost a year ago to the day. It was spring 2020, the first really nice day of the spring, and my enjoyment of the lovely weather as well as my lunch were interrupted by what I call the Egg Foo Young Dogman. There are a few Chinese food restaurants in my town, but only one that I consider to be within walking distance. During the winter, though, the path to the Chinese food place, or at least the path that I enjoy taking, tends to get snowed in and icy and uncomfortable to navigate for someone my age who has some mobility issues. However, once spring arrives, I thoroughly enjoy my customary ritual of walking back there to get some Chinese food after a long winter without it. On my first day back each spring, I always get Egg Foo Young. It's just a tradition with me. It was the first Chinese dish I ever had when I was a kid, and it's stuck with me ever since. Mind you, I do have a car, and I can get in it and drive to get food at that or any restaurant that I would desire, but I grew up in a time when things were seasonal. Besides just pumpkin spice lattes, I mean. I enjoy missing things when they're out of fashion, just as I enjoy being reunited with them when their season comes back. It's just that I never suspected that Egg Foo Young season would overlap with Dogman season. So remember back around a year ago, March or April 2020, I can't recall the exact date, but I remember some nervousness as I walked to the restaurant on that gorgeous warm spring day, wondering if the place would be closed because of COVID. When I got there and saw that it was in fact open, I felt as happy inside as a kid on Christmas morning. Sadly, I couldn't sit and enjoy my meal there as I always had, but it's not like that was the only tradition trampled on unmercifully in 2020. Glad to have a bag full of nostalgia and comfort in my hand, I strolled back home feeling as happy as a peasant under lockdown can possibly feel. At least it was spring, and I was smelling the unmistakable aroma of Egg Foo Young once again as well. Now, there's that part of my path to the Chinese food place which is difficult to navigate, which I told you about earlier. It's a path through some woods where the bedrock gets exposed and becomes the path itself. If water freezes in little concave parts of the rock's surface, it can get very slippery, and you can't really see which parts are slippery or not until you step on them. At least I can't, so I have to take that part of the journey a bit slowly. Even in the warm months, it's easy for someone like me to trip and fall down over there. I mean, I haven't done it yet, but that's because I'm hyper-vigilant about it. At any rate, I was going through that part of the woods where I have to slow down and watch where I'm stepping. I was very focused and very zen, which is probably why I noticed the very faint sounds of someone following me from behind. I spun around in fear and caught sight of this immense, hairy man with pointed ears on top of his head. I thought it was some kind of a fur-covered half-man, half-boar, but then the thing started barking at me. I mean, barking almost exactly like a dog, but with a deeper, hoarser kind of bark than I'd ever heard from any dog before. The two front bottom fangs on this thing were abnormally large and came up so high, they were taller than the top part of the creature's snout when its mouth was shut. This is why I thought it was a boar. I'd only ever seen teeth or tusks like that before on a boar. So now I'm facing this boorish dogman who is barking at me, and I'm trying to casually take steps backward to move away from the angry beast. He kept barking at me, but at least he wasn't advancing toward me, so I sort of felt like, so far so good, you know? I could see that I was almost back into the thicker part of the woods, the easier to walk on dirt path that was the final stretch back to my house. I considered making a run for it, but at my age I seriously doubt I could outrun that man with the dog face and the loud barking. I felt incredibly sad. I really thought this was going to be how my story ended, and that did not seem like a very pleasant way to go. When suddenly, an idea came to me. The egg foo young. For all I knew, the smell of the food might be the reason the dogman was following me in the first place. Maybe if I left my food for him, he'd allow me to make it home safely. It seemed worth a try, so I slowly squatted down and opened up my bag. As quietly and smoothly as possible, I opened up the food containers so that the creature could have at them if he wanted. Then I stood up and slowly began backing away from the food. The dogman charged forward toward me, and I screamed and limped away, expecting to be jumped and finished momentarily. When I didn't feel anything, I turned and looked, and I discovered he had jumped that sweet, sweet egg foo young, though, instead. He didn't care about me anymore, and I didn't blame him. And so, I didn't get to have my yearly spring ritual completed. I had to content myself with not having died. Like I said, this was a story about 2020, and it's the story of the egg foo young dogman. Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. We've got an episode-long dogman story for you that starts in a second, but first please allow me to thank our newest executive producer, Skeets Grimseeker. Let me tell you about executive producer Skeets. He defeats the cheats and keeps receipts. He's not a tweaker or a shrieker or a streaker. He's a real mind freaker. Skeets Grimseeker. Please join me in thanking Skeets Grimseeker for making this episode possible. In return, we post links on our community page for him to see our weekly secret uncensored scary dogman stories far too wild to run on this channel. And Skeets, if you go to our community page and scroll down, one of those members-only posts should have links to view our 15 hours of archived, uncensored dogman stories. I'll try to remember to put a new post up this week with the links to those 3 5-hour archive videos available to $3 members and above. Just go to peterbernard.com and join our PayPal subscribers club, or do what Skeets Grimseeker did and click the join link under this or any of our videos. And now onto our dogman story for today. We call this one Dogman. In the lightning storm. Dear Scary Stories NYC. My brother and I once thought we saw a dogman, and we thought we saw it in an electrical storm. It was either out there or someone pulled a world-class mind freak on the two of us. I'll tell you about what happened, and you can decide for yourselves. This was way back in the 1970s when my brother Troy and I were still kids. We were weird kids, though, because we used to like to listen to old radio shows. Troy was almost 5 years older than me, and he even had a collection of audio cassettes of radio shows. He bought some through the mail from a company called Radio Yesteryear, and he would record any radio drama or comedy that got played on the radio in our time with this recording setup he had in his closet. Now, please don't picture anything a modern kid might have to record off the radio. This was the 1970s. He had a handheld tape recorder that I think he got at Radio Shack, and it recorded onto cassettes. He had a radio that played AM or FM. He had bought some kind of long plastic wire that he said was an antenna. Then he would attach the wire antenna to the radio and tune in the station he wanted to record. He would wait until the show was about to start, then manually push the record and play buttons at the same time. Then he'd quietly close the closet door behind him. We were never allowed to listen to radio shows as they happened. We would record them and then listen to the cassette later. Listening live might ruin his audio. I remember all this as much as I remember the werewolf or dog-headed man or whatever it was, because Troy and I were binging on old radio shows the night of the sighting. Our parents had gone all the way into town to have a romantic dinner together in the rain, and that meant we could blast the shows in the living room on the good stereo and really enjoy them. Troy had picked out a bunch of scary shows because it was such a spooky night. There was a thunderstorm way off in the distance that seemed to be slowly approaching. I could hear the thunder faintly, and I would catch the sky lighting up briefly on the horizon every so often. In the beginning, we were actually listening to new radio shows that night for the most part. New back then, at any rate. Our favorite was Radio Mystery Theater with E.G. Marshall. But there were other new radio dramas being produced back then, too. One of them was hosted by Rod Serling, and one was hosted by Leonard Nimoy. Back then, they would list what was going to be on the radio in the daily newspaper like a TV listing, and you could find out in advance. I remember he recorded Fibber McGee doing hour-long commercials for Chrysler AirTemp. I wonder if those are on YouTube. I'd love to hear them again. But we weren't listening to comedy on that night. We were listening to stories about ghosts and unseen monsters prowling the moor at night. I have no idea what a moor is, but it sounded as scary as the night was beginning to look. I remember one story was too scary for me, and I made my brother take it off. It was about this lady that was driving to a wedding, but the rain made the road slippery. Her car crashed, and the only person around was an old man operating a ferry. She paid him a coin to take her to an island in the middle of the lake, which was the only thing around that had lights on. She wanted to use their phone, but when she got there, she found out they had no phone. "She's dead," I said, and my brother laughed. "She's dead already, but she doesn't know it. The show still has over a half hour left before she figures out that she's dead." The idea of that made me shiver. I mean, literally, between the rain outside and the idea of this poor lady being so confused and so trapped in her own purgatory made me feel like my body temperature was below freezing. My brother obliged me and took off the tape that was freaking me out. Then he took his time picking out just the right one to put on instead. While he fussed, I looked out the window, watching the storm getting closer. When there would be a flash of lightning, I would begin counting in my head. 1, 2, 3, and then the sound of the thunder would hit. My schoolmates had told me that if you count to 3 before the sound hits you, that means the lightning is 3 miles away. If you can count to 4, then it's 4 miles away, and so on. I don't remember how far away the lightning was by that estimation, but I was noticing that it was getting closer and closer each time. It was also getting louder out there, and more intimidating. For a kid like me, in the downpour out there, it was pitch black, and then when the lightning would flash, it would momentarily become broad daylight. For just a second, I could see all the way down our back lawn, over our 3-foot-high back fence, and then down our rich neighbor's lawn to the forest that they co-owned with another rich neighbor. Then everything would go black, and I would see nothing out there at all until the next flash. It was amazing, but also terrifying to me. I was as scared of lightning as I was of ghosts and monsters, which means a lot. My brother put on this show that I only remember ever hearing on that night. It was called something like From Out of Time, or From Out of the Past, or From Out of the Future, or something like that. The announcer in the beginning sounded like an insane man from Mars or something, and I was instantly more frightened than I had been. while listening to the ghost lady on the island in the lake. There were bells ringing, but it wasn't the clock, which was a different show. This was a creepy voiced guy with an echo and tolling bells, and it was a story about a werewolf. This was like emotional torture for me, listening to that werewolf story on that night. I loved horror and monsters so much, but they also made me feel like peeing my pants and hiding under the table all night. I probably wasn't ready for it yet, but I would collect famous Monsters of Filmland and Monster Times magazines, and I loved them as much as I was terrified of them. I guess I was just a weird kid. This radio play that my brother put on was not one from the 1970s. It was old even back then. It must have been one of the shows he paid for and bought through the mail. It was about a kid whose father brought home two strangers, and one of them was really a werewolf. A white werewolf, in fact. The show was even scarier than the previous one, but it was way more interesting. Werewolves beat ghosts for me in terms of scary stories. They make me too afraid to move, too afraid to make a noise. I get so scared that I tense up all over, and I even start to get sore from it after a while. So I was listening to this old, creepy radio show from before my parents were even born, with these actors doing strange accents that made them all sound like Dracula to me. I stared out the window into the black, rainy night, watching my own worried expression being reflected back at me. It was so dark outside and just light enough inside that the window functioned as a kind of a mirror. And then, every once in a while, the lightning would flash down from the sky off in the distance. And then our backyard and the next backyard over would all light up like it was noon, but just for one brief moment. It would be the same view afforded to me each time. The two empty lawns being flooded and the forest in the distance. And then, one time, when the lightning flashed, there was something else added to the scene. At first I thought, well, I thought it was the Yeti, but we don't have Yeti here in Wisconsin. And another thing that I didn't learn until years later, the Yeti don't actually have white fur like in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. What I saw for that brief moment was a large animal standing up like a man and covered in white fur. I froze to the spot, not wanting to move my head, willing some more lightning to flash so that I could see it again. I stared at the spot in the distance that I had seen the creature, trying not to lose it and waiting impatiently for the light to come back on. And then bam! I saw it, fully illuminated and standing in front of the tree line in our neighbor's backyard. It wasn't a Yeti. It was a wolf. It was a white-furred wolf. But this white-furred wolf was standing up on its hind legs. The werewolf in the radio story was white too. My brother put that radio show on. He must have also put somebody up to wear a white werewolf costume in the backyard next door. I tried to guess which of the neighbors that was wearing the costume. I felt nothing but furious anger toward Troy in that moment. He had thought it would be funny to scare me to death with a prank. An old radio show about a white werewolf coming in out of a storm, then some friend of his pretending to be the same, walking around in the storm outside. I got up and turned the tape recorder off, and I started screaming at my brother how much I hated him for doing what he did. He looked completely confused though, which to me meant that he still hadn't dropped the act. He was still trying to prank me even after I figured it out. He had no respect for me. My own brother just thought I was someone to pull cruel tricks on. I cried as I shouted at him. He really didn't know what I was talking about, though. He said that if there was a white wolf outside, he wanted to see it too. I remember us kneeling on the shag rug in front of the tiny bookcase my mom had in front of that window. She had plants on top of that one row of books, and we peered through them into the dark window, waiting for lightning to show us what I told my brother I had seen. Eventually, it did flash, but neither of us saw the white werewolf that time. I pointed out to my brother where it had been, and he asked me what direction it seemed to be heading in at the time. I told him I thought it was standing still, but it was facing our house when I saw it. We both wondered out loud if it had gone back into the woods or continued in our direction seeking shelter from the intense rain. Troy turned off all the lights, and we crouched down, our faces inches from the window, waiting for the next flash of lightning. Troy suggested we look all over when it flashed because if the creature was still out there, it could have moved to a very different location in all that time we had been waiting. This was a point in my friendship with my brother where I felt like I trusted him again. I knew he hadn't been trying to trick me and that he had nothing to do with what I had seen. He clearly wanted very badly to see what I'd seen, and although at first this made me feel happy and respected and loved, as the seconds ticked by in the darkness, listening to the rain beat down on everything for miles around, it began to dawn on me that my older brother was scared of what we might see out there. Yes, it was nice that he believed me finally, but if he believed me, that meant it definitely wasn't a friend of his in a costume out there. As bad as that had seemed to me a few minutes prior, it felt like a far preferable outcome to that being an actual white werewolf out in the rain. And the fact that my brother was playing that creepy old haunted-sounding recording of those strange actors with stranger accents, talking about a white werewolf as I had the vision. What if the two were actually related? What if that radio show actually conjured the white werewolf? Or maybe called it out of the storm? I don't really know what I'm trying to say, but if the two were related and not coincidental, that implied we were experiencing a supernatural or paranormal event. And if that creature outside were supernatural or paranormal, then we might in some way be in some very real trouble. Remember, this was the 1970s, when many, if not most, horror movies did not have happy endings. Even Planet of the Apes, which was supposed to be for kids, had that ending where you realize that all of humanity was destroyed. It was a bummer for adults, but truly shocking for my generation. We had been raised on Bozo the Clown, so the sinking sensation that we were witnessing or experiencing the paranormal, to me, meant that I might never see my parents again. I felt like hiding, but I also felt like crying. It was not fun. It was a terrible experience for me. I honestly thought that this was going to be the end for both me and my brother. And then the lightning flashed again for a longer time than before and much closer to directly overhead. The thunder sound came sooner, although I had forgotten to count. It shook the entire house, but was somehow less frightening. We had a little more time to look around during the lightning this time, and we were both quite certain that there were no figures out there in that night. None at all. And most especially, no dog-headed white yetis. Our moods lightened a bit, and Troy suggested I should jump in bed before our parents came home and caught me up. The nightmare was over, and we were feeling normal again. I asked Troy if we could just wait for one more lightning flash before he turned the room lights back on, and he said okay. We both got into our spots, peeking out from between the leaves of the potted plants on the bookshelves, kneeling on the shag rug, and we kept staring out into the absolute blackness for some time. After a while, it seemed funny and I started giggling. Then Troy joined me because it seemed so stupid what we were doing. I whispered to him, "Imagine Mom and Dad came back right now and saw us kneeling at the back window." We both started laughing. The entire thing was so ridiculous. Troy told me, laughing, that if I didn't stop making him laugh, he was going to force me to go to bed before the next lightning, and then, BLAM! Lightning crashed down straight into the center of our yard, shaking everything and making both of us fall back away from the window. Directly in front of the glass, between us and that bolt of lightning, was the sickest, mangiest looking wolf-type head I have ever seen. It was snaggle-toothed. I mean, the teeth seemed to each go in a different direction. It looked like God was drunk when he planned out this wolf head. And that wolf head was connected to two very broad, very furry white shoulders. It was like Arnold Schwarzenegger wearing a mangy old dripping wet white werewolf costume. Troy and I probably screamed like small children as we ran up the stairs to our shared bedroom. Troy made sure our windows were locked, pulling down the shades in case the werewolf climbed up onto the roof to look in at us, and he locked the door to our bedroom too. He grabbed his Louisville Slugger and he sat down in the chair opposite the door. He was red-faced, and his eyes were weeping tears. It made me feel really scared seeing my older brother looking that afraid, and I remember I just hid under my covers and listened as hard as I could. I wanted to hear that werewolf if it came close, but much more than that, I wanted to hear my parents pulling into the driveway so that I could finally feel safe and get some sleep. Honestly, I don't remember any more about that night, so I assume that my brother and I didn't die. My parents must have gotten home safely as well, presumably. My brother and I used to talk about the white werewolf all the time, although we never saw it again. In fairness to the DOGMAN or whatever it was, we didn't want to see it again. When Troy and I used the downstairs at night when my parents were gone after that, we would pull all the shades down first. That white DOGMAN could have been a few feet away from us on multiple occasions, but we were far too chicken to even want to find out. If you had seen that nasty-looking dog-like face up close, like Troy and I did, you would understand why we both took a pass on wanting to go through that again. I guess it's one thing if you're wondering if monsters are real, because then you have curiosity that you want to satisfy. It's like an itch that you need to scratch. But if you already know that monsters are real, and you know they are majorly ugly, and you know they will hurt you, and you know that they come out in thunderstorms and they look into windows of houses that you're inside of, well, if you know all that, then you lock the doors, you lock the windows, you pull down the shades, and you listen to the sound of the driving rain. You feel the thunder in the distance, and you pretend that you are still naive enough not to believe in the DOGMAN in the lightning storm.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it. You can become a channel member by clicking the join link below. Then you can check our community page to find the links to 10 hours or more of secret, uncensored DOGMAN stories too wild to be told on this channel. Your other option is to join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. That's Peter's homemade club, where he will personally email you the links as well as occasional secret club follow-up messages. You may also be included as an executive producer in a future episode. You have a scary experience you want to tell us about? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com, or else call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LESS-SCARY. The machine cuts off every few minutes, so if you have a long story, please keep calling back and we'll piece it together later on. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.